Good morning, everyone. Can I remind you all that this meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so we are all on camera. Please be aware you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future, whenever and wherever people want to watch it. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I've had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I'd like to welcome everyone attending the meeting today and anyone watching the meeting via the webcast. Please can all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put on silent. If there is an emergency alarm, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic Car Park. So, there we are. If we look on to item 1 then, attendance and apologies. Has everybody filled in the attendance book and the register? You all happy with that? Yeah, good. And item 2, declarations of interest. Has anybody got any declaration of interest?
Chair, if I can just assist at this point.
Yeah.
Previously there have been declarations of interest for yourself. It's a personal and non-prejudicial interest in relation to the fact that your brother owns a travel business in Rhondda Taff and manages Moomaka minibus and taxi hire.
Yeah.
Can you just confirm that that's correct, please?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Robert. Meeting of the Licensing Committee on the 24th of January, on page 3. Page 4, page 5, page 6, and page 7, and page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, and page 12. That's the Welsh version as well.
I'll move them, Chair.
Thank you. Everybody in agreement? Anybody any comment? No? Licensing fees, page 4. Item 4 on page 13.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that we have 4 reports today. And this is a special meeting that was supposed to be considering 2, and it's expanded from there. What I'm therefore proposing to do is to go through each of the reports this morning quite quickly, highlighting the points that I feel are important for you to consider. But what I would say is then, if there are any matters that you want me to go back over or to provide further information on, just chip in as we go through. Would that be the best way forward, Chair?
Everybody in agreement with that? Yeah? Okay with that.
Okay, thank you. So the first report is on licensing fees, and these are the general fees for everything except taxi licensing. I've done that mainly because the taxi licensing requires consultation, which the rest of our fees do not, and therefore for future committees I'm going to be treating them differently, and they'll probably be coming to you at different times so that we can get through the different timescales that we have to achieve. So this report is looking at the non-statutory licensing fees that fall to this committee for determination. And those are for animal establishment licensing, gambling, hypnosis, film classifications, scrap metal dealers and collectors, sex establishments, street trading premises. So that's what we're going to be discussing in this first report. In Appendix 1, I've attached a methodology that we've used for calculating these, and this is the same methodology that we've used for the gambling fees that have come before you twice previously. So I think that that's going to be something that you should now be used to, and the fact that we're looking at different elements of the cost, but it's based on a cost recovery basis for the fees. So looking then at the general fee setting principles, as I've said, we've got our process that we follow. There's different legislation such as the Provision of Services Regulations 2009, the statutory and other guidance, and there's case law to which we have to have regard, and all of that's been brought into the methodology that we've been using. So what we basically do, if you look at 5.1.3, is that each year we're going to be looking at the fee-setting process itself to make sure that nothing has changed in law or in case law since the last time we did it. We then look at the underlying data that it underpins our fees, and particularly have any of the licence steps that we take, have they changed. We speak to the finance department about our hourly rates and on costs. We look at other things such as IT, specialist equipment, etc. Has that changed in the year? The other thing that we do look at is profit and loss. So if, for instance, in the year we've had something unexpected that we had to do, we're entitled to charge that over the next year or the next couple of years. On the other hand, if something should have happened and didn't, then we actually have to refund that to the licence fee payers over the next couple of years. And the classic for that would be if we were planning to do enforcement and somebody left or we had a problem and didn't do that enforcement, we'd then refund in the following year or over a 3-year period.
Yeah. On page 14, 4.4, we say that the licensing fees covered in this report have not been fully calculated and adjusted for inflation for a number of years. So I've got a couple of questions on that. One is, how long is a couple of years? Is there a reason why not? Because I can see from 5.1.3 that you've just gone through with us that procedures not been established whereby fees are reviewed annually. Is there some reason why we haven't done it that way in the past?
I think that mainly it was the previous licensing officer who dealt with this left. I came into this new and I've had to pick this up. But also there was a lot of change going on. So between the last time this was done and this time, there's been guidance, new guidance issued. Because actually I was learning how to do this at the same time that I was working with DEFRA on new legislation. Actually, the most recent bit of guidance is the guidance I wrote. So as I learned to do this, I was writing guidance that's actually been adopted nationally. So all of that was going on. And of course, we have had other priorities over the period. So unfortunately, this is just something that we haven't been able to get round to in the way that we wanted to. I think that a lot of these were last done in 2015. Okay, so that was the general fee setting that we've looked at. And as I said, we look at different things. We look at the underpinning costs of policies, actually setting the fees, having authorised staff in place, trained staff, etc. We look at the process steps. So, from the time somebody first rings us up and says, I want a licence, please, how long does each step take us? And then we look at the hourly costs, and then we work it out so that each type of licence has its own fee set for it. So, are there any queries on the methodology? Because I think that's for you is going to be the important thing, is setting how we actually set the fees and the underpinning ethos of how we do that. And everybody's comfortable with that, thank you. So just moving on then quickly through. So for the animal establishment licensing, we've got different types of animal establishment licensing, which I've calculated for each one. One thing to note on these is that I've calculated separate fees for small and large businesses. I'm not required to do so. We can charge the same fee for everybody. But my feeling is, and I don't know whether you agree with me, that for a small premises that might only have a few animals there, it might not be fair to charge them the same as a big boarding kennel, for example, takes in 60 dogs at a time. But also, because the small businesses can be very, very difficult to find, I want to encourage them to come forward and to become legally licensed. Otherwise, it's going to cost this authority an awful lot of money to try and find them. So I think that was my view on that, is that having it calculated that way is fairer and actually encourages compliance.
Yeah.
Another question, sorry, Chair. Page 39, annual establishments, annual licence. For the small domestic, you've got plus vet fee required, but you haven't for the renewal large. Is that because they're just so big they do their own vets?
I think that for large premises, we automatically take the vet in, and that fee is therefore included in their fee. But for domestic premises, after the first inspection, so when they're renewed, once the vet has signed off that he's happy for me to do those inspections, I do them by myself. And I just call the vet if there's something there that I need the vet there for. And I think also because a lot of the small premises that we do on cats and dogs, I have a lot of experience myself, both personally and professionally with those. Whereas if I was, for instance, looking at somebody with snakes, or some of the other things that I have considerably less experience on, or some of the tropical fish, they can be very specialist, and I would then take in either my vet, or if he isn't specialist enough, I'd find another vet to take in that has that expertise. Okay. So I think that's it in terms of the annual establishment licences. As you can see in Appendix 2, some have gone up, some have gone down, but what we're doing is trying to be fair to everybody. And I think the interesting thing is on these in particular, because I was working with DEFRA on the fee setting, I was working with business representatives as part of that. When I was telling them what fees we were getting and calculating on the basis of this guidance, they were saying, "Oh, that seems very fair." So I'm fairly comfortable that what we're doing is fair for businesses, but they were tending to represent big businesses, and I've tried to be fair to small businesses as well. So are there any queries or questions on that one?
Anybody got any more questions?
So going on to the gambling licensing then, I don't propose to go into much detail on this because you have actually looked at these fees twice previously. The proposal today is that we adopt them for a further year. So we adopted these in August, but in order to bring them in line with all of the other fee setting, those ones you approved in August will now go for 18 months through, so that they come in line with the rest of the fee setting, if you are in agreement with that. Okay. For film classifications and hypnosis, I think these are relatively straightforward. We haven't had any applications, or we've had no recent applications, but other authorities have, and we could. So what I've done is I've calculated fees for all of these based on our best guess for how long they would take. If we get an application in, we'd have to review our fees on the basis of our experience with that application, but they should be fairly straightforward. Are there any queries on either of those? Okay. So moving on to scrap metal, we've reviewed these in line with the enforcement that we're finding that we're taking, and also in terms of the fact that we're finding some difficulties with that enforcement. And I think particularly in terms of dealing with the scrap collectors that go around the streets, we can't find them very easily. When we write to them and ask them to come in with their paperwork for us to look at, sometimes we have difficulties getting them to come in. And this is because some of them are actually illiterate. So we almost had to get hold of them to ask them to come in, but we can't, get hold of them until we... So we are having difficulties chasing them, and the increased fee reflects that. It doesn't actually affect any of them this year, because they've all just applied for their renewals. It would affect any new applications coming in. Are we okay on that? Moving on to sex establishments. I'm sure that many members may be disappointed to hear that we don't have any. Although they are controversial when they happen.
You'd love to see them on board.
Yeah, precisely. Yes, exactly. And I'm sure that I will get all of the usual jokes about having a visit to the premises, even when they come in. In fact, we don't expect any. I think that when we look at sex shops, the reality is that most of those sales are now online. There's a very big online market now. And in terms of we have had a couple of applications in the past, but as I said, I don't expect any more. And in terms of the lap dancing and sex cinemas, again, I think the sex cinemas now is mostly online as well, and the lap dancing, we wouldn't expect an application in this area. But just in case we get one, that is not the time to be thinking about what to be charged them, so we've worked out a licence fee for those as well. And I've done it differently. I've done the sex shops separately to the sex cinemas and lap dancing. We don't need to, but the sex shops tend to be relatively straightforward, whereas I think we could expect a very great deal of controversy over other applications, and have therefore calculated them separately. Are there any queries on that one? Okay. So then the street trading, we've been used to having street trading for many years. I think that we have actually reduced these fees, and that reflects the fact that actually most of our street traders are very straightforward. They've been with us for a long time. We're not doing a lot of enforcement with them now, and that's reflected in the fees. We're not doing the work, so we're not charging for the work. Okay. Are there any queries or questions on that one? Oh, okay. I think the last thing I've put in here then is the general fees and refunds. What I've done is I've changed these slightly so that if somebody applies and immediately withdraws it, we just hand that back. But if we've done some work on that, I think it's fair for us to charge for some of the work that we've done. It also reflects the fact that some of these licences are covered by the Services Directive that I mentioned at the beginning, and some are not. What that means is that some are permitted to pay separately for the application fee and then for the enforcement element of that fee. And this was particularly important, I think, when in a case affecting Westminster Council that was charging £30,000 for a licence, most of which was around enforcement. And what they said was, well, it's not fair paying that up front and then having all the wait for us to get to the licence. We've paid that money and you're sitting on it. And that isn't permitted under the regulations. So what we're saying is that even when they do have to pay up front for it, it's only fair for us to hand that money back if they don't then get the licence. So if it's determined, they will actually pay the administration of determining that licence, whether or not they get the licence. But if they don't get the licence, we would then refund the enforcement element of it. And I think this is important because it reflects the amount of work we do. It reflects the fact that we've actually determined their licence, but also it'll help deter those applicants that are just applying on the off chance that they'll get it. And I think this is particularly when we come on to the taxi licensing. Some people are putting in an application in the hope that they'll get a licence even though people in a similar case didn't previously. And I think that that is something that we have to be aware of, that does take us quite a bit of work. We've also put in some money just to reflect the amount of work we do on copying licences and changing licences. Some of these are covered in the legislation where there's more work involved and has been covered separately as a fee. For instance, if you're just changing the licence for a sex establishment, actually you have to do a lot more work than that and go through another consultation process. But if it's very straightforward, we're just going to do a basic fee on that. So that's the work that we've got so far. And just a few things to point out is that actually, although we've done cost recovery, it isn't full cost recovery, where some things, we've averaged things out, but where we're not sure we've taken the lower average. And also the hourly rates for next year haven't been calculated yet, and therefore it's based on this year's rate, so it's not including, for instance, the pay rise that's been coming into force on the 1st of April. that actually helps us. It helps to show that if anything is judicially reviewed, it does help to show that actually we've not been charging the absolute maximum, that we have tried to be reasonable, and that it's a good cost recovery, but without squeezing every single penny that we can, because it takes longer to actually do that anyway. So I don't think it's really cost effective to do that. Okay. Where licence fees have actually fallen, it's because we've actually been very realistic about the time that we actually do take on these now, and it's normally through a reduction in enforcement. And sometimes we've made a decision, for example, where we said, well, we've been enforcing, we've actually have done that work, but we're not finding anything wrong when we go in. And is it fair to charge them for continued enforcement when actually they're compliant? So that's where that's come in.
Come in, yeah.
Quick question on that, really. I notice on 586 on page 20, it says around 25 street traders buy an animal for £1,000 and the expected lot of income is therefore, and you've explained that it's because we're not doing as much enforcement because they are regulars. Is any of this fees returned because we haven't done it? We didn't do the enforcement last year, and that therefore we can expect an increase next year because there'll be no returns in it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, when I looked at these, I think that what we decided is we had been doing quite a bit of work, but there wasn't necessarily a need to be doing as much as we'd been doing. But I think that that's kind of born out of experience. We've done the work, we've tested it, and this is what we've found. I think the other thing is that we have been doing some work there, and the case law is that if it's just pennies and it's just a bit here and there and it swings and roundabouts, in fact we don't necessarily need to pay them back. But if, for example, this year we found that actually it was a bit more than we expected, then we'd use the same swings and roundabouts argument to say, well, actually we won't charge them more. That's the swings and roundabouts. It's only where there's a significant loss or gain that we'd be required to consider that as part of the fee setting process.
Thank you. Nick, would you like to...
Yes, thank you. Just can we come to page 57? This is more for clarification for myself. Annual consent on there, Torvine 385, current fee 700, proposed fee 649. Can we just throw some light on that so I don't quite understand it? Page 57.
We just confirm, is this the street trading fees and the comparison? Okay, so...
Just noting the Torvine there has got a price, annual consent, for example, £385.
So the proposed...
But the current fee is 700?
Yes. And the current fee is 700, the proposed is a little bit less, yes.
Yeah, but what's that figure at 385 for Torvine?
You're right. I think that... what have I put in there? I think the current fee is 700 and coming down to 649. That is the current fee. Let me just have a look on the previous one. Will show you. Okay. The one that you need to pay is actually on page 55, and that is showing that it was 33. It's coming down to 334. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is that table is incorrect. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I think the Torvine it is going to be it's coming down from 385 to 334. So that is the total licence fee as it stands.
Yes,
so
thank you. A supplementary in that case on that. I mean, looking at the comparisons with other authorities, we are considerably lower than, and very considerably lower than. This is a fee that we can afford to do it at that amount without losing money on it.
Yes. And I think that is. I think that we've gone through. We've worked out how long it's taking us for the enforcement that we're doing, and that is therefore the maximum fee that we are permitted to charge. I would also say that we do work very closely with the food team on these, so sometimes, you know, if they're visiting as well, and they would check things for us. So it isn't that these premises are not being inspected; they are being inspected, but it wouldn't necessarily be by us as part of the licence fee. So, but that is what we've calculated. Yes. So yes, I'm sorry, just for clarification then, on page 59, Appendix 7A, street trading fees, if you could take out the last two columns for current fee and proposed fee, and then what you've got then is actually what is going to be there is... and I will tell you what I've done on that, and I do apologise, members. We were using a lot of the same data for Blaenau Gwent, and that's showing the Blaenau Gwent current fee and proposed fee. So I apologise for that, because the Blaenau Gwent one isn't on here. So those are the Blaenau Gwent fees. Ours is considerably lower. That is just showing what work that we're doing.
So would it be similarly on the other tables where it's showing Blaenau Gwent as being highlighted?
If I was, yes, it may well be. Yes, if it shows Blaenau Gwent separately, so yes, you can see that on page 53, Appendix 6, it actually shows Blaenau Gwent proposed, and it shows the other authorities there.
And likewise on page 49 for 5A and
yeah.
etc.
Yes, if they're not actually shown Blaenau Gwent, then those are shown as the Blaenau Gwent ones.
Could I just ask then, just to be clear on that, so far as our setting of our licence fees, it covers, you know, if we took it as a whole, our costs for doing and issuing these licences are all covered.
Yes, okay. That is, we've done our very best to charge everything that we can charge while still being fair to the businesses. There are some things that are not charged, and if I just run through those, there are things that are covered by other legislation that are not permitted to charge for, and that, for instance, would be freedom of information requests and other such things. There are some things that I have looked at and have charged fairly rather than accurately. The big one for that would be the animal establishment licensing. We used to have that done by a technical officer. That technical officer was made redundant. He accepted a redundancy, and I'm now doing that work. But I don't think it's fair to charge the businesses for the fact that it's now a team leader doing the work when it used to be a licensing officer doing the work. So what I do is I charge for the work that I'm doing with my team leader hat on, at my team leader rate, but then the work that could be done by me or another licensing officer, but it happens to be me, I charge at the licensing officer rate. So it doesn't cover 100%, but I think it covers something that it covers most of what we're doing as fairly as possible to the businesses. And I think that what I've asked for is, what I've thought of is, you know, if I was a business, would I think this was fair? So it isn't 100%, but I think it's 100% of what I think is fair and reasonable.
Could I also just ask on that vein, if Chair, if you don't mind, do we feel that the enforcement side of it that you do, which obviously is a cost to the department, would it be better, because I see that we are considerably cheaper in all of our fees compared to our comparative authorities, would raising the prices slightly across the entire board give you a little bit more scope and a bit more money to maybe be even more effective in enforcement and looking for some of these establishments that you think aren't actually licensed? Would there be a benefit in doing that, bearing in mind that there is a case because our comparative fees are considerably less than other authorities?
I think that there are arguments for and against, and if I just run through those. The argument of can we charge for looking for unlicensed premises is a very grey area. this is what got taken to court in Hemmings versus Westminster, because Westminster were charging their licensed sex establishments for enforcement against the unlicensed sex establishments, and the licensed ones were saying, well, that isn't fair. We've come to you, we're legal, we're above board, why should we be paying for the ones that aren't? So I think that there was quite a bit, and it went to the High Court. This was carried on over a number of years of consideration, and I think that the outcome was that it may be fair to charge them a little bit for that. If, for instance, you can show that by taking out unlicensed businesses, you're doing them a benefit as well, but it would be very, very difficult to charge them a lot. And, for example, on the animal establishment licensing, for me to try and investigate an alleged illegal boarding or breeding establishment at a domestic premises, that can be very, very difficult and challenging. But I might only have one or two other licences of that kind, and would it be fair to ask the ones that have been legal and may be very small businesses themselves to pay for the investigation of the illegal businesses? Some legislation actually says that we can, but some legislation makes no such provision. And if we were questioned, that could actually go then to judicial review. So I think that in terms of the unlicensed businesses, we've actually said that it's fairer and more legally correct to not charge licensed businesses for investigating unlicensed businesses. I think in terms of the enforcement that we carry out, then the question is, are we charging for the enforcement we need to do? And I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is that if we think we need to do it, we actually do have the resources, although there are some changes afoot that I will tell you about separately. But if we've got the resources there, then yes, we should be doing. But we shouldn't be gold plating, and I think that is the phrase that's quite often used for doing more than we actually need to do. So it's very clear within the guidance and within the statutory guidance is that we should be doing what we legally need to do and no more. And the example, as I said, is where we said that we've been going to these places, we're not finding anything, so why are we going to these places? And I think that's the exact example of us saying, well, if they're actually getting it right, they're fully compliant, why should they then be paying for visits they don't need? But it also is a very good thing for us to say to businesses where we are doing a lot of inspections, we can turn around to those businesses and say, look, if you guys actually work on complying with the law, we can actually reduce the fees that we charge you. And I think that's then a very good argument for them to work together to make sure that they're complying with the law. And that's what we want in the end, is businesses that comply with the law.
Joel, did you want to come in?
Thanks for that. I just got to say that I completely agree with you. I think it's in our interest to keep the licensing fees down, to encourage the businesses to come forward and to encourage more business to Torvine. So, yeah, I found that very interesting. Just thank you. Yes.
Members happy know any more questions for Alison before we look at the recommendations? Are we okay?
Sorry, Chair, if I can just interrupt. Perhaps Alison has further comments in relation to the report before we go to the recommendations. Yeah. Sorry.
We're ready to look at the recommendations then.
Alison, it's entirely up to you. I just wanted you to be given an opportunity to mention anything else in the report that you wanted to. I am just mindful of the fact that we're talking about fee setting, and I just want to make sure that members have an opportunity to go through the appropriate sections of the report.
I'm happy now that I've explained everything that we do. It's just a question of whether you have any questions to ask of me at this stage.
Another question?
I'm just going to thank Alison and the team for a really good report once again. I understand how difficult it is for you with the cutbacks and your team's forever shrinking. And just personally, I want to thank you and your team for doing an outstanding job and all the work you put in.
Yeah. Members now ready to look at the recommendations? Has anybody got any more questions before that? No? Well, the recommendations for members are asked to either approve the non-statutory licence fees fall into this committee for determination, or, should they not approve any proposed fees, indicate their preferred fees as appropriate. So where would members want to look on the recommendation?
I move that we accept the approval. Sorry, I move that we approve the proposed non-statutory licence fees.
I'll second that.
Okay then, thank you. Yeah, okay. Proceed on to the next agenda now for taxi licensing fees, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I've just confirmed that the taxi licensing fees have been calculated in exactly the same way, I don't intend to go through that one again then. If we just look at 5.2, just to confirm that the taxi licensing fees shown in Appendix 2, what I've done is I've shown the calculated, the existing fees are in column 1. The fees to determine the licence, that's the administration side, are in column 2. The calculated fees for enforcement are in column 3. The total payment on application, and this is one where they do have to pay for everything up front, that is shown in column 4. So that just gives you an idea of what those fees are going to work out as. Most of these have gone up by more than the rate of inflation. The reasons for this are that the new guidance has highlighted the need to include more of the underpinning activities that weren't included previously. What happened was when the previous manager was calculating these, he didn't have that guidance to hand. It's come in since that time. We've also been improving the recording of the enforcement activity that we're doing, and we're also recording the work that we're expecting in terms of the consultations from the Welsh Government and everybody else. So, as you will be aware from the other reports, there's a lot of other things going on in Taxiland at the moment, and that is reflected in the fees and the work that we're doing. In 5.2.3, I've explained that I've calculated the over 8 vehicles separately. We used to do these as one, but the over 8 vehicles do take a little bit of extra time for us, and I think that reflects the fact that it reflects that extra time, but I think it's still value for them because it means that they're using their vehicle for an extra couple of years. So I think that it's fair that we kind of have a little bit of extra money from those to reflect the work. I think that the big issue that we have had is in terms of the private hire operators, and that fee has fallen considerably, and it's simply it's down to enforcement. We have had a fairly significant enforcement issue over the past few years. It has taken a lot of time to resolve, but we're hopeful that that has now been resolved. Now, I think this is one where we said about actually reflecting what's going to happen in the future and what you're expecting. We're expecting that the problems have now been resolved and gone away, but it's one of those that if problems do happen again, for any of the private hire operators or anybody else, and we're involved in a lot of extra work again, it's one of those that we can bring back to the table and charge for in future years. So it's not something that we need to be concerned about. This is now reflecting the work that we're expecting to do. Just to give you an idea, that for clients who own and drive their own taxi vehicles, they're going to be looking at paying £283 based on the existing fee, and that'll be going up to £349 a year on the proposed fees, and that's going up from £5.45 to £6.70 a week. There are some other fees.
On the vehicles that are slightly 8 years and over, have we seen an increase of people coming in and paying the extra money because the vehicles are getting older?
I think that this is something that we haven't discussed with the trade yet, and as I'm about to explain, it's about to go out to consultation. So we'll see what they say about this. It could be interesting. But I think that there are some businesses out there that do run older vehicles, because it is more cost effective, and they can then offer a better price to the public. So, that's what it comes down to in the end. One thing just to bear in mind, when I come on to something in a minute about disabled access vehicles, is a lot of our over rates are disabled access vehicles because they are, those are very specialist and expensive vehicles. So that might be something we'll come on to in a minute. Okay. I think it's a good point. Okay. So, yeah, just to let you know, even if you look at all the other costs that they're having to look at, we look at an increase of about £1.25 a week. They have actually just had a Hackney Fair carriage increase, which only affects some of our vehicles, but actually 2 journeys at the higher rate that has been permitted would cover the weekly increase in the fees. So we are talking quite a small increase compared to their overall costs. However, it is an increase at a time that they're trying to be competitive, so it's a case of bearing that in mind. Looking at the comparison of these fees against neighbouring authorities, I think the thing to bear in mind is we're not allowed to now just to compare with neighbouring authorities, which for me, as the officer responsible for fee setting, is a bit of a shame. I used to take what everyone else had done and put it somewhere in the middle, and that would be what we did, and we now have to do a lot of work calculating these. But we're not ever going to be the same as other authorities. I think the first thing to bear in mind is actually the other authorities, some of them are not doing full cost recovery. And the other thing is some of them are not using the latest guidance. That's because it was only published in February. But I was the one writing it, so I've had this guidance to set these fees. But it's interesting to see what other authorities are now coming up with based on that guidance. There's a lot of work going on across the UK now on that. The work that the fees are based on is going to be different. And I'm aware, for instance, that some authorities have a much more compliant taxi trade, where a lot of them are owner drivers and they really care for their vehicles and they know it's their business. So there are different types of business going on. And I think the big thing for us as a small authority is that we can only share our costs between a small number of taxi drivers and other licence holders, whereas a bigger authority can share those costs between more people. That is something to bear in mind. However, I think that our fees are very much in line with a lot of other authorities. Now, looking at 5.2.7, I think this is something that we do need to be thinking about. You have previously agreed a reduction in the fee for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and that's currently £80 in respect of new applications and £70 for renewal applications. And it would, what we need to be asking is whether you wish to consider continuing a discount and what level of discount you would like to see. A discount is beneficial in demonstrating our support for the provision of wheelchair accessible vehicles. And just to come back to your point, Chair, it also reflects the fact that these are older vehicles, and we might want to think about how that affects whether we charge them the increased fee for over 8 vehicles when they get to that age, for example. However, to bear in mind that any discounts need to be funded through our general funds, we can't refund that money back to other taxis. So we can't charge others more because you're charging these less. Yeah. Okay. So just to let you know, there are currently 21 Hackney carriages and 6 private hire vehicles that would fall within this category. And I think that what we're finding at the moment is, that isn't really enough for the disabled people out there. So anything that we can be seen to be doing to encourage that has got to be a good thing. So I think that just moving on very quickly, I think that I've mentioned how many people are due to be covered by these fees. I think the biggest financial impact would be on the vehicles. Most drivers have just applied for their 3-yearly licences. We don't have any 5-yearly operator licences due the next year, but obviously all of the vehicles are annual, so they will be affected next year. I think the final thing to say is that taxi licence fees must be advertised for at least 28 days. So this isn't a case of deciding what the fees are going to be. What you're deciding today is what fees are going to be advertised for further consideration by this committee once all the responses come back. Okay. So I think that's about it. The general funds and refunds are going to be as previous, and I think most of the rest of it is as it was for the general fees. Thank you.
One question, and it's on page 63, and it's 5.2.3, but there's three 5.2.3s. It's the last one. Right. And it's the most significant. The cost calculated for private hire operators have fallen. The most significant reason for this is that the previously some time-consuming enforcement that's been carried out has now come to an end. Is this just that thing that you were talking about a couple of difficult ones, or is this some change in legislation?
No, it's just reflecting the fact that that's what we were doing. That's now come to an end, and we're hoping we're not having to do that again.
Just one thing. I mean, I'm more than happy to support the discount for the disabled ones. I mean, it's less than £2,000 a year, and it seems to me to be very reasonable.
Have we finished the report? Yeah. Has any other members got any questions before we look at the recommendation? No? Everybody happy?
Chair, could I come in at this stage, please? Thank you. Alison, could you discuss the disabled access vehicles fee and what you propose to do in relation to that?
Okay, yes, because we have actually not put that on the advert at the moment. May I just ask then, I think if we go through to the recommendations, what I've asked for is consider the taxi licensing fees now that approve the proposed taxi licence fees for consultation, or not approve and indicate what else you want to do. But the second one is to indicate whether a reduction in the licence fee in respect of disabled access vehicles should be offered. So that is part of the recommendations, part of the discussions that we're asking members to do. So,
what recommendations? Sorry, what reduction rather are you asking members to consider?
It's still 10, is it?
What I've done is I've listed the existing one. Okay, I think the question is whether it's going to be more or less than that. But also, I think that coming back from the comment made by the chair, whether we want to charge the additional for the over-8 vehicles in respect of disabled access vehicles, or whether we continue charging them the lower rate. They would still pay for an extra MOT, but that would be the only additional payment that they would then make.
Charles, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think personally I'd rather keep it as low as possible to encourage more disabled vehicles on the road, because at the moment, you said it's only 21. So, that just isn't enough for all at Torvine. I think anything we could do to help get more taxis disabled on the roads is just win-win.
Any other members like to comment on that? Or have you got any? No, are we all in agreement with the £80, or? Well, show of hands just to see, yeah?
The last meeting that we had, mentioned that you would be in consultation with the taxi operators, and they were quite happy with the fee that they would be charged. Was there any alteration of that, or what they could charge?
I think that's when we looked at fares,
Right.
rather than. Yeah, I don't think we haven't had a discussion with the trade on this date. I think one of the things that we're going to be discussing with the trade coming out of this is whether we can set up a taxi association in this area, so we can have these discussions before we come to committee with these and give you the trade view. But I think the other thing to bear in mind about the consultation is we're not just consulting with the trade, we're also consulting with the public and with the taxi users, because you know, if you put the fees up, then the fares go up, and they're going to be paying more. So they might have something to say as well. But also, they may think that it's not fair as a ratepayer to be subsidising. So it's where you find that balance. But we haven't had any discussions with the trade so far on this. It's something that we are hoping to do for the future. It's just been set up in Blaenau Gwent, and that came out of discussions on the taxi licence fees. There was a lot of discussion and debate on that, but actually what's built out of that has been a very good, positive working relationship that covers a lot of things, and we're finding it very useful.
We go through the recommendation, and it's just to consider the taxi licensing fees and either approve the proposed taxi licensing fees for consultation, or should they not approve the proposed fees, indicate that the fee should be consulted upon. But on the second part of that is indicate whether a reduction in the licence fee in respect of disabled access vehicles should be offered. So, would members like to comment?
To comment on really is what Giles has said. I mean, I fully agree with what he's saying. What I'm having a little difficulty thinking about here is it only the £66 direct annual cost of vehicle renewal that you're thinking about not charging, or is it some of the other fees? Because then it starts to get a bit complicated, if you see what I mean.
I think what we'd be talking about doing is that for the renewal application, so if we take the new application, a new vehicle coming on would be £299, and at the current rate it would be £80 reduction for wheelchair accessible vehicles.
Yeah, that's fine. It's not that, it's the renewals for the over 8-year-olds.
Yes, what we'd be
doing, they're all going to be renewals,
yeah. I think what we're saying is that as it would currently stand, it would be £262 or £319 with a £70 reduction for wheelchair accessible vehicles. But what we'd also say is for wheelchair accessible vehicles, we wouldn't charge them the extra for the over 8 either. We'd just say fine, they pay for the extra MOT, but that's all they'd pay for.
Right, so
they wouldn't pay for our extra work in enforcing and dealing with the over 8 vehicles.
Sorry, can I just interrupt it?
I'm lost now.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just interrupt at this stage? Alison, what page are you referring to?
I'm on page 77.
Okay, now we're on that page, Chair. Can I ask for clarification on that? So just so that we're totally clear, for a renewal for an under 8-year-old vehicle is £262, and they would receive £70 if it was a disabled vehicle. If the vehicle is over 8 years old, the renewal would be £319, with a £70 reduction for it being disabled.
Yes. But actually, what I'm thinking, it would be the £262 for a disabled vehicle will all be charged the £262 minus 70 for disabled vehicles. All disabled vehicles would be £262 minus the 70.
Regardless of age?
Yeah.
That makes it clearer. Thank you.
You're happy with that? That's clearer, isn't it? Would we want to go on the recommendation? No. Yeah.
Well, I'll propose then that we accept 1.1, we approve the proposed licensing fees for consultation, and we indicate that we wish the reduction for the over 80s and that the fees remain the same as they were this year. Yeah.
Members happy with that? Are we all in agreement? Yeah. That's okay. If we can move on to item 6, the taxi policy update. That starts on page 109.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'll just go quickly through this then. What we're asking is whether we should be reviewing our taxi taxi licensing policy, and this is the policy that sets how taxis should operate in the Torvine area. As you know, we have the policy that sets the age of the vehicle and matters such as that. We discussed this in March of last year, and we discussed the fact that the Welsh Government were looking to change all of the legislation, and this committee therefore felt that it wasn't worth reviewing the taxi licensing policy at that time. A couple of things have changed since then. I think the first thing to bear in mind is that the Welsh Government consultation and process was delayed. It has now morphed into a consultation on all of public transport, and they're looking at the public transport, including buses, with a major discussion on whether we should have a joint transport authority, which we'll discuss on the next report. And I think what we're looking at is the fact that actually it could now take some time before any national changes come into force. So it's a case of, is there anything that we need to be looking at in the meantime? Because we can't depend on this all happening nationally in the short term. And there were two things that we felt that we should bring to your attention and to ask whether you think we need to take this forward now. The first is smoking in taxis. We do have a requirement at the moment that Hackney drivers and private drivers should comply with the Health Act 2006, which prohibits smoking in any licensed vehicle. So we have that in place at the moment. It's currently illegal to smoke in a car. It's currently illegal to smoke in a car with anyone under 18 as well. So anybody on the school one wouldn't be able to smoke. What we've been doing, as we've been reporting to this committee, is serving fixed penalty notices for taxi drivers who have been found to be smoking in their vehicles. But what we're finding is that some are claiming that they weren't smoking, but were instead using electronic cigarettes. Now, what's happened is that we took the most recent case, went to appeal. He refused to pay the fixed penalty notice. He went to appeal, and the view of the magistrates was that we couldn't prove that he was smoking an actual cigarette beyond reasonable doubt, and therefore the driver won on appeal. What we're saying is that actually, if they've got an electronic cigarette, it's very difficult to tell whether they're actually smoking or smoking an electronic cigarette. I think that when I did actually discuss this with one of the private hire operators that was in talking to me about something else. They said, well, I thought we'd already banned electronic cigarettes in taxis anyway, and in fact we haven't. And his other phrase, which I'll repeat to you, was, well, what's wrong with them stepping out of a taxi and having a cigarette then? And I think that's what we're saying, is that if they want a cigarette, don't do it when you're in the car, don't do it when you're carrying a passenger, you step out of the vehicle, and what we're saying is you do the same with an electronic cigarette as well. And that's what we'll ask is, for your thoughts on, do we go out to consult on this at the moment? Is it important enough for us to consult in order that we can apply the Health Act and actually enforce that?
Joe, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I think so. I personally wouldn't get a taxi with anybody been smoking in or vaping in, because I dislike the both. And I think if you're paying for a service, you should be getting into a clean environment. It could be quite... I find some of the smells of vapes quite offensive, personally, and there's nothing worse than the cloud of vape in your face and you don't smoke yourself. So I think if we can encourage them to have a vape or cigarette outside, that's a way forward, I think, because there's more and more data being released now that vape isn't as lung-friendly as what they say it is, and I think we should be edging on the side of caution and perhaps putting something in place, personally.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've raised this quite a number of times, haven't I, previously, so, I mean, I see it as a positive read to making consultation with it.
I think that coming from a public health point of view, I think vaping is seen as very useful in helping people give up smoking, and it is safer than smoking. I think from what we're looking at from this point of view, as you say, it isn't always pleasant to get into a taxi where somebody's been vaping, but also it's difficult for us to actually take action on smoking cigarettes if they're then claiming that they're vaping instead. So I think that that's what we're looking at from here. And so we're not discouraging taxi drivers from vaping, but if they step outside of their vehicle to do so, we think there's we'd rather than that than smoking from a public health point of view. Okay, moving on then, the second thing I'm asking for your opinion on whether we go back to consult is the IOL guidance, so the Institute of Licensing guidance on determining the suitability of applicants and licensees in Hackney and private hire trades. There has been a lot of discussion and debate throughout the UK about the standards set by some local authorities in terms of the safety or otherwise of their drivers. And this is particularly coming from the incidents in Rotherham and in other areas where taxi drivers were involved in significant mistreatment and sexual abuse of underage and vulnerable girls and others. So this has really come out of that. And I think that this is now being looked at for adoption across the UK, and the licensing expert panel has agreed that all Welsh authorities should now look at the adoption of this. So a number of authorities have already done so. Most others are in the process of looking at this. It is very important that we get this right and that our taxi drivers are safe. In fact, I think that we already have reasonably robust guidance. I think that and speaking to the solicitor, she's very happy that what we have in place is very good. And I'm very happy that the standards that we enforce and the checks that we carry out are good. But I think that in adopting this guidance, I think that it does do a couple of useful things. It gives guidance for members and officers on things, on questions such as the likelihood that an applicant will re-offend. So it's got some very good guidance in here that we don't have in our existing guidance. The types of offence are listed rather than specific offences, and this helps to future-proof it, that if the law changes, our guidance that refers to that law could be out of date, whereas this is more likely to be future-proofed because it refers to types of offences. So it refers to offences of a sexual nature rather than specific legislation. And the third, I think the big change for our trade is that it would then apply to vehicle owners as well as drivers. And that is something that's really coming to the fore now with the county lines and the drug issues where they're using children to transport drugs. You may have a driver that has a clean GPS and nothing known about them, but all that means is nothing's known. And, it doesn't mean they're not involved in things that we don't want them involved in. Would you really want the vehicle owner that is known to be involved in the drugs trade, for example? And I think this is where we need to say, well, the vehicle owner would then need to be looked at.
TPS, when I was reading the report, they say some of the authorities have a bit of a discrepancy. Some are doing more in-depth DBS than others. Can you explain sort of what the difference with the DBS is?
I think that some authorities, it transpires, may not even be doing DBSs, and I hate to say that any local authority would not be in this day and age. I think that some are doing the basic rather than the enhanced. We do the enhanced, which actually looks at more than the, it goes into more detail and actually looks, it also gives the police the opportunity to comment on intelligence as well as actual offences. Now, you may remember the murders committed by, was it Hartley? Ian Huntley, that's the name. And that gentleman got a job as a caretaker at a school. A basic DBS was carried out, but not an enhanced DBS. And what that meant was they looked at what he'd been convicted of, but he hadn't been convicted of anything. But there was a great deal of intelligence and concern about things that he'd been questioned on, and which later had a very strong bearing on the fact that he murdered 2 little girls. So the enhanced DBS goes much further. And I think the other thing that we look at, and I think that we're very robust on this, is we do look at intelligence, not just convictions. And we take police concerns very seriously and report those to yourselves, or if it's urgent, straight to the chief officer for an immediate decision to be made. And I think that things like we've had cases where somebody has been accused of rape, that has been a direct chief officer report straight away to take his licence away until it's been resolved. In fact, that it was found that there wasn't any case to answer, there were no police concerns, and we gave his licence back to him just as quickly as we could. But whilst those concerns were there, he did not drive a taxi. And this is what this is really going to be about. It's about addressing concerns, but doing it in a more proactive way. And I think the important thing for the taxi trade is one of the big concerns is that a taxi driver that is refused or revoked in one authority can then go to the next authority and get a licence. But of course that doesn't prohibit him, him or her then driving in the first authority, and still taking bookings in that area. And we could have a case, for example, where somebody bidding for school contracts is a licensed business in a neighbouring authority using their drivers, but it's someone that we've prohibited. So by using the same guidance throughout, we avoid that situation. Now, I would just say that this came about because everybody saw the need for it, and the Institute of Licensing has taken the lead on developing national guidance. In fact, the department, since I first brought this to yourselves for attention, we've been looking at this for a while, and the Department of Transport have now waded in, and they are looking to adopt national guidance that would be Welsh guidance as well, and that would be something else that would become statutory for us to look at. So this would just be a pro tem until we can look at this nationally. But that guidance is coming in, but until we know when that's happening, I'd rather be safe than sorry and have the more robust guidance in at the moment. There are a lot of changes, but as I said, this is about making sure we're up to date until those other bigger changes can take place.
Oh, I was just going to see if members got any questions. Okay.
The only thing in this report that surprised me was on page 127, if the applicant has, from the age of 10 years, I assume that's 10 years of age, spent 6 continuous months or more living outside the United Kingdom, evidence of criminal record check from the countries covering the relevant period should be required. I understand that the age of criminality in this country is 10, but as I understand it, it's not the age of criminality in every country. So I do wonder, whether that age of 10 is I wouldn't want to draw any doubt on it, but it does seem to me to be a guidance that this country will take, and that's not really going to be very difficult to enforce, because it's in other countries it's not the same.
Do you want me to come in here? I mean, it's just about the age of criminality, really, and it's just having that starting point, and that the authority would look from that point in time. But of course, they're going to view convictions in childhood in a certain way. If nothing else, they're going to be spent after a certain period of time. You know yourselves, you've had experience as panel members where you've had people come before you with misspent youths, and then all of a sudden they settle down. They have a family, and they want a job, and they want to drive taxis. So it's just a starting point. What information we get from abroad normally is it's very difficult to get hold of, but that's not to say that the department wouldn't consider it.
I think this is about finding what information we can, and of course then this is, just to bear in mind, this is guidance. We are informed but not constrained by that guidance. So, as was pointed out, it may be that there's stuff on there that you might consider in light of local, standards, and think, well, that's okay or that isn't okay.
Yes, I just wanted to, to add to that. I think that what this recognises is that these are markers, and it gives us an indication of certain behaviours that we should look at, and this must be in there for a reason, and it gives us some guidance to look at particular cases in a little bit more depth. As you quite rightly point out, what we do with that information afterwards is guidance, and I do take your point that this age of criminality and what records are kept there. It just asks us, in certain circumstances, to look at people based on experience just a little bit more deeply, and from that point of view I think it's a good idea, because this has obviously come from some form of research.
Yes, if I just say that I think that at this stage what we're looking at is, if you agree, is to go out to consultation. So we'd have to consult on this. I think other authorities have chosen not to, because they think this is a national document and it's within our purview just to adopt it, but I would feel more comfortable speaking to the trade, speaking to others who are going to be affected. So I think that it's just a case of going out and getting some views on that. I think that the local accountability is very important on getting the information to you to consider. And I think we've been discussing cases where I think if you just said to the public, we've just approved a taxi driver with X on his criminal record, I think they could be quite shocked. But when you actually hear what happened and the facts of the case, you think, well, actually, yes, it's listed as a crime of a sexual nature, but actually it was a drunk 17-year-old doing something incredibly stupid that didn't affect anybody else. Nobody was harmed. And I think, as soon as he was sober, he would have seriously regretted doing that, and he hasn't repeated it since. You get cases like that. So I think the difficulty is that local authorities have been criticised for making decisions that on the outside might look strange, but when you actually get down to the nitty-gritty are actually reasonable decisions. But I think this helps to show that we're all on this, we're all making the same decisions the same way. And I think that will be the important thing for the trade and for those who are being protected by us.
I just have one question, and if this document is going out to consultation, I mean, I agree that the electronic cigarettes and however long that is going to take us, but if this is going out to consultation, my recommendation would be that we consult quite quickly on this, because I think we need to get this in place.
I add, sorry, Councillor Williams, it's just that we do have a very robust system in place. This will allow us to be consistent with our counterparts in Gwent. Also, it's going to be, the procedures will be tightened up because this is wider. Therefore, it has a wider implication for us. But we have always been robust. We've considered the Louise Casey report, it's called the Rotherham report. We take all sorts of information into account, case law as well. This is just another way of protecting the residents of Torvine.
Alison, it's a little bit savage. GBSs, right? I'm stop again. I am involved deep down with a bit of, we're talking about a council. I got a GBS as school governor for Garntech School. Now, I will be fair, in 1792 I did spend a bit of time with the Queen, or for the Queen. Right? And in all fairness, this is still on my record that you had nothing else that was there. But Garntech School applied for the GBS for me because I'm a school governor. Torvine Borough Council will not accept that GBS to allow me to go drive a minibus for Capital. It is the same GBS. There is no difference whatsoever. You know this as well as I do it. And I do think it is a waste of time and energy to keep going back for the same thing to be printed out. All he was.
I don't worry that, Councillor Williams. Unfortunately, the way the system works, you have to apply each time you work with children. So whether it's in whatever context it is, I mean, you could be in charge of a swimming team, but then being in charge of scouts. That's still two DBSs as far as I'm concerned. And that's the way the system is, unfortunately. And they could be, you've applied really closely to each other, but so you have to go through the procedures that are in place. So
I think it's a question of whether we are able to depend on that information, and we can depend on it if we've asked you to do it, but we can't necessarily depend on it otherwise. I would just say that this is perhaps the time to make a plea for everybody to be going on to the DBS refresher system. You can actually apply, and what happens is you pay every year, but it's actually a reduced fee. You then don't have to do it every time. We can go in and check it automatically anytime when we need to, but you're not having to apply.
So does that work for taxi drivers then? Could taxi drivers do this?
Yes.
And it would be every single year they would pay the amount, is it?
No, they pay less than 1/3 of the DPS application, but they pay it annually. But what it means is they've always got an up-to-date DBS, and they're not having to. And the other thing is they're not having to wait, because sometimes you have to wait for that DBS to come back. So we always recommend that system.
But I'm glad we got the enhanced one, because we're doing more for the residents of Torfaen than most of the other authorities. So, yeah.
It's just a very quick one with this consultation, because I agree with Councillor Karen. If we're going to implement this, we need to consult quickly. It doesn't say in there how long this should be, and I think we ought to set a time limit to have this report about this consultation back.
If I can just say that you have just approved the taxi licence fees for consultation, which is a minimum of 28 days. What I was posing is to go a little bit over that to give us a bit of time to get that consultation out and to do this at the same time. So hopefully, with your approval, what we would do is, and also with this legal approval, is get this out this week for both consultations and give them until the 3rd of May. And that allows me then to write reports to come back to you in early June for consideration. If that timescale is acceptable, we can then get both reports to you by early June for adoption or otherwise as you see fit.
You happy with that, Alison?
Thank you, Chair. The only comment I'll have to make is our system in place at the moment is robust.
Yeah,
so anyone who comes before us will be dealt with in accordance with that. To me, this is just an enhancement. So I'm not concerned that we're missing anything and that we have to rush this through. Consultation has to be done correctly and widely. There's a lot of case law surrounding that. So I'll be having conversations with Alison about it.
Recommendation to...
Not necessarily. It is just that Alison needs time in which to do it. Okay. She's saying it's June. I'm not saying that it's not going to be pushed back. It just depends on what comes up, because it could be that there's a query that comes up that we hadn't considered, and therefore we'd need to go back to the trade in relation to that question. But at the moment, we're anticipating that it comes back before you in June.
Okay.
I think a quick consultation would be good on it. I think that being able to share information between different boroughs that this includes, I think that's the key, isn't it? I know we have a very robust system here, but Newport or Blaenau Gwent may not have such robust, and if drivers are able to cross our borders and drive and pick up, residents of Torfaen, I think it's very important that we're able to share that information. So I think that's why we'd all like to get this done as quickly as possible and implement this if possible. So I'd like to move that we put these out to consultation and the recommendations.
All right. So, well, it's two parts of the recommendation. Consultation with the trade and public in respect of whether the use of electronic cigarettes in licensed vehicles should be banned, and or whether the Institute of Licence guidance on the suitability of applicants should be adopted. Right, okay then. To item 7 of the Welsh Government Transport Consultation Update, which is a vast.
Well, thank you, Chair. This is an update from a discussion we had at our last committee meeting. It was regarding the Welsh Government's consultation document on improving public transport. I had to reattach that one as an appendix in case you'd missed it or lost it from the last time. I think we spent a lot of time on this. What you asked me to do last time was to get responses back from yourselves. So thank you for anybody who did respond back. I then drew up a consultation document based on the conversation we had last time, any comments that came back, and also, as requested by you, the Welsh Government, the All Wales Licensing Panel expert panel response, and a few weeks ago I then circulated to yourselves a draft response. I'm hoping that this has now covered all of the comments and observations and concerns that you have in respect of the taxi licensing elements of this consultation. I can tell you that the bus elements have been looked at separately, and just to confirm that under the Constitution, all responses would go back via the Chief Officer. They have drafted that to include all of this, so it's just now a case of getting your opinions on whether any changes need to be made in the consultation response that we give back to the Welsh Government.
Members got any comments regarding the report? It's quite a lengthy one, I know, separately. So, I mean, the only thing that I picked up is they were looking to try and take the majority of the localised stuff away from us, and I think that was a bit detrimental to what we need within total.
I'm hoping that I've actually brought that out. I've not only emphasised the problems that we have, it's under question 33, which starts on page 219, so on page 220 and 221, and going on to 222, I have given quite a bit of information about why we think that that won't work as well as they hope it would work. And then on page 222, onto question 34, I think that I've then gone on to say why we're in favour of retaining local responsibility. What I have done there is recognise that there is scope for a Joint Transport Authority to look at taxi matters, but it would be very, very valuable to for them to look at the bigger picture, the wider context of taxi provision. One thing that has come through very strongly from the Blaenau Gwent Taxi Association is they point out that trains get public subsidies and buses get public subsidies, but taxis do not. But they're still doing a very important service, and particularly for the more vulnerable parts of our society who can't, drive, like the elderly or the disabled and children who can't get around any other way very often. And I think that in terms of the disabled access taxis, I think that they are more expensive to buy. And if the Joint Transport Authority was able to kind of look at grants to help that would be extremely useful. And I think also looking at a wider public health viewpoint, if they were to look at the provision of electric points for taxis and to encourage electric taxis, these are all big picture issues that a joint transport authority could really really bring things together very well and assist the trade in that way, but leaving the enforcement to the people who are local and know what's going on. And that's what I've tried to bring out in the response that I've given.
Anybody want to read any more questions regarding that lengthy report? The recommendations are they still wish to make a response in respect of the Welsh Government consultation on public transport, and, if so, whether the draft response is agreed or whether the amendments are required. So where would you like to progress?
What the draft response is?
I think we don't need to respond. We
were
were very, very happy. We needed to respond.
Everybody happy with that? Sure.
Happy
Yeah.
with it.
Thank you. And thanks for the comprehensive report there. Item 8 down is date of the next meeting, so will we have that?
Chair, I do think it's June now. We'll have the AGM in May. You'll have the new committee will be appointed. There'll be member training, and then in June you'll have a series of reports before you.
Well, thanks everybody for their attendance.